Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have a little more encounters, and we only have a couple of more days until we hear from Victor again. Man, I am getting excited to hear what he has to say. Before we get into today's upload, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on my Patreon, my PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Those links are in the description below. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3. The audiobook version, written by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. They're available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes. The links are also in the description below. Now, I've taken enough of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first part of the upload. I live in Georgia in a rural town, not too far from a major city. There's a set of woods that's behind our house, and it divides two neighborhoods. It's about a mile wide, if that. Strange occurrences have surrounded these woods. Small things, random trash tarps, etc. I should mention, it's more swampy marsh than woods, so it makes camping in there impossible. One night I was taking our dog out. He stays in the back half of the house due to him not liking the other dogs. I took him out the side door and walked around the house to the fence for some reason. When we left the house, he was absolutely terrified. He did not want to go out. Very unusual for a dog who is quick to snatch someone's soul if prompted. Not thinking about it, we pushed onward. After he tinkled, he walked back. This is when I noticed it, or rather heard it. Crunching of leaves. At first, I thought it was one of the dozen cats on the property until I realized it was matching my steps. If I walked, you could hear it walk. If I stopped, it stopped. There's a small clearing between the woods, where one of the sheds are. That's when we saw it. My dog was the first to see something, and then I saw some, creature. It was taller than the shed, so maybe a good 8 feet tall, and it darted across the clearing at a crazy fast speed. My dog, who again isn't scared of anything, bolts so fast I dropped his leash and he ran to the door whining. I was quickly behind him. Once we were inside, I quickly bolted the door and ran to tell my girlfriend what had happened. She immediately wanted to investigate, saying it's probably a woodland creature. Armed with 2 flashlights, we went out the front door. As we walked toward the wood line, we could hear something moving around. It sounded maybe 200 yards away. As we scanned with our flashlights, we saw nothing but kept hearing it. Then we heard it get closer and closer until maybe it was 20 feet away. Still nothing. No eyes, not even an animal call, just rustling. My girlfriend, now scared, heads for the house. I decide to check with my neighbor to see if one of his many dogs got out. When I arrived at his house, my neighbor, who we'll just call Dave, explained all his dogs are accounted for. Curious, he came to investigate. This is when I noticed that whatever this thing was followed me along the wood line to Dave's house and was now standing behind Dave's house. Gun in hand, we went into his backyard to investigate for something. We could hear it rustling, or maybe running, about 100 yards away in the thick, swampy woods. Way too thick for a person to walk in, let alone run in. Then it stopped. It was dead silent. Scanning, and at the edge, we hear and see nothing. And then bam! All of a sudden, it's 5 feet in front of us, sprinting at me. It slammed the fence so hard it rocked back and forth. Dave, scared shitless, shot randomly at will. Nothing. We never saw it. Never had it got close to us. Again, as I mentioned, the woods are thick. Too thick to run in, so what the fuck teleported silently in front of us and slammed the gate? Spooked, we were about to run, and we heard it. It was human in nature, but not English. It sounded alien-like. Not a known language. Dave, a hunter for the last 40 years, still to this day can't explain what that was. Anyway, after we heard it, we bolted. He covered me and I ran to my house. Not 10 minutes later, we both heard a loud explosion come from the woods. It shook our house and flickered our power. I ran outside to see what it was, and of course nothing, but when Dave came out and confirmed he felt the thing, we both were again terrified. Moments later, 2 strangers from the neighborhood came driving down our cul-de-sac, and they agreed the blast sound they heard came from behind our house. 911 was called, and 2 police officers interviewed us separately. Our stories matched. The responding officers refused to go anywhere near those woods. They took the report and left. To this day, we're still not sure what that encounter was. Also, Dave does not go outside at night anymore. It spooked him that bad. I'm sorry if this was poorly written, but I know you guys wanted to maybe hear my story. I understand I need to clarify something. The reason I say it was about 8 feet tall is because when I saw something dart past the clearing, all I saw was the light being blocked out from touching the shed. It blocked the light all the way past the top. It was fast, like a flicker, but I can confirm that it was something, as my dog saw it as well. Today's second part of the upload. I had something happen when I was about 12. I was out hunting. I grew up in North Carolina and at the time was an avid outdoorsman type and often had to hunt or fish to eat. Times were different and harder back then, and I don't hunt anymore. Can't stand it, to be honest. On the way home, with no success, something presumably large and very noisy began to follow me through the woods. I left the woods for a farmer's path and followed along its edge, but the rustling noise continued to follow me, crashing along about 20 to 30 yards in from the path. At one point I stopped and just looked in the woods, trying to see if it was a bear or a deer or something. It got quiet, then all of a sudden pine cones began to fall from the trees near me, and the noise, I'll never forget, began screeching at me in a very high volume. I can only describe it as like an evil primate sound. I've never heard anything else like it, aside from when monkeys get angry. But it was worse than that. It sounded extremely menacing and angry. My blood ran cold, my skin bumped up, and felt electrified. I was dead-ass horrified in a way I've never experienced before or after. I fired the single-shot .410 I was carrying into the trees above me and fucking booked it down the path. The thing followed me, now seemingly staying up higher in the trees. It kept howling every few seconds, and the trees shook so much that when I looked back, I could clearly see them moving as it moved through them. I had to run about a quarter of a mile down this path until I reached the lake. Then I ran along the path by the lake about 1/8 of a mile until I reached my yard on the other side of the lake. I managed to reload and fire my gun in its direction 2 more times along the way to absolutely no effect. I don't know how I managed that, but I remember dropping a few shells trying to reload, because doing so at a full sprint and while terrified is almost impossible. It followed me as far as the woods allowed, never giving up the chase, and even as I crossed almost half an acre yard and ran to my front door, I could still hear that screaming coming from the woodline. I was so scared that when I got into the door, I couldn't get it open at first. After a few seconds, I got in and slammed the door behind me. The howling noises stopped as soon as the door shut. No one was home at the time. I was freaked out pretty badly and struggling to rationalize the situation. I was so friggin' scared I didn't know what I was doing. I just sat there in shock with my back to the door, as if I thought I needed to do that, hold it shut or something. After doing that for about 10 minutes or so, I sat in the recliner and kept my gun aimed at the door. At some point, I fell asleep. My parents came home a few hours later and found me passed out on the floor by the chair. The 410 was still loaded, but had been put on the gun rack in my room. I had no explanation for that, but I was in shock, so who knows. Honestly, just typing this has caused me to kind of freak out. I still get heavy chills, and I'm almost 35 years old. I've experienced a lot of weird shit in my life, but only one other scary incident. But that one takes the cake because it was very physically real. I don't go in the woods anymore. If for some reason I have to, I go heavily armed and never alone. There's some shit in there, man. Today's third part of the upload. I was about 18 at the time. Seems weird saying this happened 20 years ago. I still remember the day. I was camping with my boyfriend at the time. We were in Nordegg, Alberta, Canada. As we were driving back from our camping trip, we decided to stop on the side of the road. There was a little area where you could pull your vehicle over in. For whatever reason, we got out of the vehicle and proceeded to walk into the bush through a trail. It was a really beautiful day out. We were avid hikers, and walking into the bush was just second nature. I would say probably 30 feet in, I saw a staircase. It was attached to an old house. Knowing now from what I've read, you are not supposed to climb a staircase in the forest if seen. I climbed it and could see all around the bush. While I was on the staircase, stones were being thrown at me. I looked around and told my boyfriend, who was down below, to stop throwing rocks at me. He said he wasn't throwing anything at me. As I came down the steps, I started to have this overwhelming feeling of fear. I then smelt a strong, foul odor. One additional rock came flying at me and hit me in the back. I knew this was not my boyfriend. I can't really explain what happened next, but I saw a distorted area. It seemed fuzzy, almost like moving water in a small section near some trees. I instinctively knew we needed to get out of there. I didn't see any creatures, but I just knew something was there and we needed to run. We both quickly began running through the forest back to the car. Once we arrived at the car, we quickly got in. My boyfriend told me that he didn't want to scare me, but that he had seen a man-like figure before we started to run. He didn't think it was human. We both, at the time, chalked it up to being supernatural. But recently, I saw him on Facebook and reached out. Both of us are married now. Talked about that experience. He told me he was sure it was a Sasquatch. The man he saw had black and brown hair, but looked distorted. He will never forget what happened. I just remember how horrid the stench was. Today's fourth part of the upload. So for context, I love listening and talking about cryptids. I love listening to stories about them. I live in Florida. Early yesterday morning, I was woken by my dad yelling for me to grab my gun, that there was a coyote attacking the sandhill cranes on the property. I had heard them going crazy, but kind of slept through it. Got up and ran to find my bullets, but I had been out the other day and meaning to get some more, so I was silently cursing myself, heading outside with my mom and dad, empty-handed. The cranes had flown across the lake. We have 46 acres and 2 lakes connected on it. Across the lake by our second gate, the cranes were there, and I saw the coyote. It was gray and reddish, huge, and looked kind of like a dog, but it was a coyote. It disappeared into our woods, and my dad told me to wait, that it was waiting for us to go away to get its meal. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it run across this tiny land bridge on our lake into the other woods, and it was gone. Later that day, I was playing RDR2 when I heard a girl who lives with us talking kind of frantically to my mom. I heard a freaking huge gator, so I go downstairs and heard that a gator was sunbathing on the bank of our lake. I really don't know if shapeshifters can turn into gators. Me and my dad went down to look at it. It was across the lake and sunbathing. And then, after a little, it moved into the lake and went around a little in the water. Later that day, there was a big storm. And then, today, another thunderstorm hit. About a few hours ago, my parents went to go pick up our food, and me and my brother and the girl stayed home. My brother heard my mom say something about laundry to him, and he said okay, and he went to her room and checked if she was there. She wasn't, and he called her. She's still out with my dad, and he kind of freaked out and asked me and the girl. It wasn't us. And then a little while had passed, and the thought entered my mind that it could have been the creature, so me and my mom saged the house. And now I'm here typing this. I'll keep everyone updated if anything is more to happen. Today's fifth part of the upload. This incident happened in 1963 in Ucluelet, British Columbia. I was 22. And on my honeymoon when I saw a creature, what I would later call a Bigfoot. I saw it clear light of day, free of any obstructions, and I have thought about it ever since. My husband and I were camping in the Broken Islands. It was early June, and the weather was beautiful. It was about 7 in the evening, and I had walked the edge of the water and began to wade out. The water came up to just below my shorts. I stood there admiring the beauty. The sun had not started to set, and there was a peaceful stillness at that moment. My husband was asleep in the tent, and I thought to wake him so we could cook dinner together. I turned back toward the beach, and it was standing there, motionless. I didn't hear it make a sound. The beachhead was gravel and the rocks that crunched and clicked as we moved around, but I didn't hear this thing at all. I couldn't understand what I was looking at. I just froze. My eyes were going all over its body, trying to comprehend. I thought it was a naked man. It was taller than me by a wide margin. I was 5'8", and this was probably over a foot taller. It was lean and lanky, like a basketball player. It was hunched at its shoulders, had long arms that hung to its side in a non-threatening manner. It had long fingers with black nails. It stood with its legs closed together. It had long feet, just like its hands and fingers. It had a pot belly, and a thin penis hung down. It had a round head, and its face looked like a person, but different. Something was off. The body was covered in brownish hair layer, but its body's outline was still visible. The hair stuck up like an orangutan. The skin on the hands, feet, and face was visibly gray, dusty and ashy looking. Its eyes were black, and I couldn't see any other color. We just stood there looking at each other. I was stunned, and he was indifferent. He never looked away, but he had an expression of indifference. I said hello in a broken half whisper. I couldn't think of what else to do. He smiled at me, his lips peeled back, revealing large teeth like horses' teeth. They looked too big and square for the mouth. When I looked at its face, the eyes, at that moment, I realized this was not a person. It was like a person, but it was something different. A wave of nausea took over. I began to vomit and felt faint. The world started to spin. I moved towards the shore and fell on my hands and knees. I heaved with such force into the dirt that I also defecated myself. The spinning stopped and I sat up. It was gone. I was there on my knees and just kept replaying the incident in my head for I didn't know how long. I stripped my clothes off and cleaned myself in the water. The sun was beginning to set, and I got dressed and lay next to my husband. I don't remember sleeping, just fever, chills, dizziness. We left the next day. I never told my husband about what I saw. We split up 5 years later. I live in Texas. I've remarried, had children, grandchildren, divorced again, and remarried. I've never told a soul about what I saw. I would go to the library and look for books about monsters, trying to understand what it was, the thing I saw. Bigfoot became popular in the late 60s and 70s. I saw the famous PGF footage. That's not like what I saw. What I stood staring at, what changed me forever. I came from a typical Texas all-American family. I wasn't supposed to see this. Now I'm someone with a secret, something I could never talk about in my real life. My interest in this subject has been a complete secret. No one who knows me would ever guess. I have never said this out loud, but I saw a Bigfoot in 1963. Today's final part of the upload. I'm a high school teacher. I love my job. I'm a math teacher, which I love, the kids hate. So to keep the kids on my side, I frequently give them breaks to just shoot the shit and do whatever. So by now my students know I love talking about certain topics, including the paranormal, but especially UFOs. We actually just listened to the Hunt for Skinwalker audiobook yesterday in class. So today, this student, super smart and talented kid, I might add, charming, witty, a great young person, says to me, "Hey, I have a story." He was driving to his house from the gym at about 9:30 at night, someday last week. He said he was feeling great, had a great pump, everything. He was turning onto his street when he saw a bipedal thing moving quickly in the direction of the road he was about to turn onto. It was in an open field and said it was the color of my classroom wall, basically white. But when I said it was white, he would say no, and say it was the color of the wall. He said it was tall and slender, but not just skin and bones, still very muscular. He said it was moving at a speed similar to his car across the field, and that its legs were long, and it had big feet. I'm struggling to exactly recall or honestly make sense of how he described its legs and locomotion, and I'm going to ask for clarification. But it also seemed like he was struggling to describe it in the first place. He mentions its knees being prominent, but also that it seemed to have that weird classic dog leg thing going on, but only when its leg was back. He said when its leg was forward, it bent like a human leg. So I'm kind of imagining it taking these fast, tiptoed looking steps, where when its leg comes down and back, it maybe changes shape or something. He said its arms were long and it had witch fingers. He did not see a head or a neck on its shoulders. He said it left a tall, blurry trail of its own image as it moved. And then the oddest thing of all, he said it turned into a sign. So I asked for a lot of clarification. But he seemed confused, as I did. He said he watched it cross the street and blend into an existing street sign and disappear via this transformation. I suggested he could return to the location of the sighting and see what he could find or remember. I find this person's report credible, in that I believe that he believes himself. I know a hell of a lot more about shit in the sky than on the ground, though. So, I don't know what's going on. Alright guys, what a set of encounters. Wow. I mean, I was blown away at all 6 of them. I hope you guys were as well. No news on my pops yet. Thanks for all the prayers. Hopefully I hear something soon. I don't really want to bother my mom yet and see how she's doing, see if she's heard anything. But thanks guys for all your prayers. It really means a lot to me. So with that, I'm going to bid y'all farewell. I've got an amazing lineup of encounters tomorrow for you. And as you know, Victor will be here on Wednesday. So thanks guys. Have a great night. See ya!